The title of this talk is Operationalizing SBOMs in the Enterprise, which is really just a fancy way of saying, I have an SBOM, now what? So I'll walk through all these things. We just heard a bit of my intro. I've done a handful of things. Prior to this, I was at Cylance. Prior to that, I was at Department of Energy. Spent some time in the Marine Corps. But all those different experiences really led to what we're doing at Netrise, which is providing visibility into this software supply chain from a compiled code perspective. But the most important thing I want you guys to take away today is this picture of me and Chuck Norris. If you guys just don't leave here with any other information, just remember that this is the day that we won the global war on terrorism. It was just me and Chuck out there on our own. And a lot of people don't know this, but one of Chuck Norris's beard hairs fell out, and that is how ISIS got started. So it's not reported on widely, but it's true. All right. So we'll talk about the trends, understanding SBOMs, how do you generate them, the quality of them, binary analysis for SBOMs, and then how do we apply SBOMs for specific security use cases. So these are questions that just keep in mind as we go through all this. And if any of you can actually answer these questions, please find me afterwards so I can hire you to work for my company. Because I'd be willing to bet that no one in this room can answer any of these questions, at least with any kind of reasonable time frame. Do I have log4j? If so, where? How many versions of OpenSSL do I have? Do I have any end-of-life or end-of-support software? Does any of the software I have malicious contributors? These might sound like easy questions to answer, but in fact, they're basically impossible for most organizations, unless you somehow have the source code for every piece of software in your environment, which obviously is not the case, because if you had all that source code, you'd be selling it and making a lot more money. And we're going to talk about software a lot. When I say software in the context of this presentation, a lot of different things, because it's way easier to say software than it is to say applications, libraries, dependencies, third-party code, open source software, firmware, contain, blah, 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 blah. So the only thing I really don't mean is source code. I'm not really going to be talking about this in terms of source code. That's really a different set of problems. We've been thinking about software supply chain security really as an industry in terms of selling a source code solution to a developer, right? And I'm not up here advocating we should not do that. I think we should do that. We should not stop doing that. All I'm saying is that the way we've been thinking about this only benefits the people building the software for the most part. You might be thinking to yourself, that's not true, Tom. If they're using a source code security solution, that benefits me as the end user. That would be true if you were getting the source code once again, but you're not. You're getting the compiled code. And the issues you find in both of those data sets are very different. And the source code is incomplete at the end of the day. So what we really advocate for and what I'll be talking about is how do we make use of getting better visibility into the software when source code is not available. There's been a lot of SBOM hesitancy for reasons that are confusing to me, frankly. But some of the issues we have, regulatory burden, compliance, what's the ROI? How do I track that? Operational complexity, are they accurate? Are they complete? All these different issues. Some of these things I think make some sense. I think things have come a long way at this point, so I think a lot of these things make a lot less sense now. But I've never seen in cybersecurity some solution get so much pushback in my entire life than SBOMs. And all that tells me is we must be doing something right. If everybody's annoyed at you for giving them better visibility, you must be annoying the right people, which I'm very proud to do on a daily basis. All right, so in terms of some of the trends that we're seeing here, first off, prior to RSA, there was just an insane number of fundraising announcements for software supply chain security companies, which is very good. Gartner released their first big market guide for software supply chain security. It left a good deal to be desired, in my opinion, but that's okay. And then if anybody's been paying attention to the DoD stuff that's been coming out recently around making procurement of software much easier, but also adding visibility into all the third-party software that's being procured by the DoD. Once again, this is where the SBOM hesitancy thing is very confusing to me. Think about how outrageous it is that it's like a new, great idea to provide visibility into the third-party software that the Department of Defense is buying. Someone just came up with that. It's revolutionary. But that's like getting a lot of news, and it's great. It's better late than never. But these are the kind of things that are able to be enabled once you have this kind of visibility. So this is just highlighting some of the mainstream coverage. We have the XZ Utils attack that happened a while back. You have Log4j. You have massive cybersecurity vendors even falling victim to some of these supply chain attacks. The Fortinets, the Palo Altos, the Avantis of the world. I'm picking on them because they all have enormous market caps. I'm pretty sure my talk at Secure Miami is not going to impact it. Maybe not. Massive regulatory drivers, both international and domestic. You have the Cyber Resiliency Act in the EU. You have multiple executive orders in the US. You have the FDA. You have the DoD regulations that are coming out. So you have a lot happening in terms of making these things a requirement, or at least describing exactly what an SBOM is, but not making an SBOM a requirement, which is a funny way that people go around these things sometimes. So the problem that organizations are facing here is just, we have great telemetry on all of the endpoints in terms of CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or whatever you might have there. But getting visibility into the software supply chain for those things is very different. So what are all like the pieces and parts that make up those processes and executables? So that's the big blind spot that still exists. So if you think about this in the context of an asset inventory solution, right? So say you're using something like an Armis or a Clarity or whatever it is, do you just log into that every day and lean back in your chair and just admire all of your assets on a daily basis? Like, definitely not. But you need to have that data set and that ability so if and when something happens, you can respond to it in a meaningful way. It's really the exact same thing, but for software components. And being able to understand what software components are where. So when something happens, you can respond to it, and you don't have to rely on your hundreds or thousands of vendors and everyone else to be true and accurate in terms of the answers they can give you in terms of whether or not you're impacted or not, because a lot of times they just don't know. For those of you not aware of what an SBOM is, it's just a list of ingredients, essentially. So you go to the grocery store, you look on the back of a can of soup, you find all the ingredients. That is functionally what a software bill of materials is. So whenever people talk about, aren't I disclosing intellectual property in an SBOM and all this, you're definitely not. You would be, potentially, if you were giving people the recipe, right? If you gave me a list of all the ingredients in a cake and said, go make me a cake, Tom, no one here would want to eat that cake, right? I wouldn't know what to do with those ingredients. So it's the same kind of thing here. You're not really disclosing any meaningful information. You're just saying, these are the things that make up this thing. You still have to figure out where they go, how they go there, how they interoperate with one another, et cetera. So it's not like we don't have a bill of materials for a bunch of things. We already do. We have it for food. Hardware bill of materials has been around forever. We have this for chemicals. We have this for all these other things that are very important for a safe and secure society in which we all operate, but we don't have it for software, even though it's very obvious that software plays a critical role in all of our lives on a day-to-day basis. I really like showing this to people in terms of helping them, I don't know, really grasp how little folks are typically doing here. If you're familiar with the critical security controls, these are in priority order. Number one, everybody can always rattle off, is having an asset inventory. Does this work? Yay. So everyone knows that. And then number 8 is malware defenses. I've never met a single company that does not have a malware defense solution. But number 2 is inventory and control of software assets. I've never met a company that had a total software inventory. So if these are in priority order, how do we have number 8 but not number 2? And the answer is we just really haven't had a way to do it for the most part. So how do you go about obtaining an SBOM? You can ask for them from your vendors. Unfortunately, my response to that for most people these days would be good luck. A lot of vendors aren't creating them. You have government and regulatory requirements, which are basically mandating you have to have them. So that makes it easier. So if you're making like medical devices, you have to have them. There's a lot of open source and community projects that are creating these. It is refreshing to see a lot of open source projects just generating SBOMs for the code they're building, just as part of their process. So that's good. Third-party SBOM services, and then you can generate them on your own if you have robust reverse engineering and software binary composition analysis expertise. But that is, once again, if you're doing that, call me. I got a job for you. So you do have some challenges in SBOM generation. The idea of completeness is very difficult. How do you know you've identified everything? Once again, though, this is like where this gets really funny to me because there's no other area in cybersecurity that comes under this much scrutiny, right? It's not, no one ever pushes back on endpoint security vendors and says, hey, you guys didn't stop all the malware, so I'm just not even bothering with you anymore, right? I'm just uninstalling CrowdStrike. You missed this one thing, forget about it. No one reacts that way. But whenever you talk to them about this, they go, we don't know if this is accurate or totally complete. And I'm like, you're right, show me all of these other perfect things that you have in place right now. And that just does not exist, obviously. You have issues around like stripping symbols, like black box analysis. You need to have a lot of experience across a lot of different domains. There's questions around where do you generate these SBOMs and when. So if you're building this code, do you wait until the end? Do you wait when you have a built application? You can generate an SBOM at basically 5 different time frames and have 5 different answers. So the best way to do it is at the very end, because that's for sure what's going to be in your environment or whoever else's environment. I also often hear things about there's no standards, there's no formats, and those people are right, there's 3. You have Cyclone DX, which is sponsored by OWASP, you have SPDX, which is sponsored by the Linux Foundation, and then you have the NTIA, which set forth a set of minimum requirements a number of years ago that the vast majority of people who do this don't adhere to those things for reasons that are confusing to me, but nonetheless, that's the case. But there's a number of these formats that exist that are backed by totally neutral third-party organizations that really just have no like monetary stake in the game. There's a number of different ways you can identify components. You can do cryptographic hashes, you can use heuristics, curating all the different package managers, do binary similarity analysis, machine learning and AI-based approaches. There's a number of different ways you can go about identifying these things. And it really takes a combination of all of them to do the best job. Just to do a quick comparison of the source code versus compiled code SBOM generation, the enterprise use case demands compiled code SBOM generation, obviously, because you're not going to have access to source code for all the things that you're buying. So this is much more relevant for this. You'll find less vulnerabilities, most likely, but you'll find ones that are actually there for the most part. From a source code perspective, you'll find like a lot more issues because you have the raw data in front of you, but a lot of those issues won't survive compilation and other binary mitigations that are put in place. So just having the final thing that is in your environment is really the reason you want to start there. And this just has some pros and cons of each that I'm not going to really go through because I think I just talked about all of them. So what this slide represents is a number of ways, I talked about this already, where, if you have a software inventory, you can start working on getting these things from like vulnerability management and patch management solutions, but at best, those things are going to get you to an application inventory. So when I say a software inventory, the list of components that make up those applications or operating systems or containers or firmware images, whatever it might be. And so you're going to have this incomplete inventory at best, and so then you won't have a way to search across all these things in your environment and basically figure out, am I affected or not? So if you do have a software inventory that has been generated with SBOMs, there's a number of use cases that Some of these look very familiar to everyone, and some of these are slightly new around like supply chain attack detection. But for incident response, determine if and where something is, third-party risk. Who here has gone through third-party risk processes and thinks that's a robust process that tells you anything meaningful? Like you go to your third parties and they say, hey, fill out this questionnaire. And if you're that third party, is it in your best interest to tell people all the bad things in your environment? Or is it in your best interest to say all the good things in your environment so you can get the PO across the finish line? So by being able to generate SBOMs for third-party software, you can actually have a data-driven approach to evaluating third-party risk. This is exactly what the Department of Defense wants to do. And it's frankly incredible to me to see the federal government be the entity, like, leading the way here. Since when does that happen? I'm very happy that it is, but normally you see industry pick this up way faster, in years in advance, but not so here. So that's fine. Yeah, so here I just talk about multiple personas within a third-party risk organization. So you have procurement. So procurement's job here should just be, just give me an SBOM, right? Just prove that you can give me something. They should not be the people like determining, hey, there's too many vulnerabilities here, so we're not gonna buy this thing or whatever. That should not be their thought. That's just not their expertise. Then you have third-party risk, who's gonna basically say, all right, what CVEs are present? How old are these components? Are there end-of-life components? Are there exploits available, et cetera? And then you have patch management. This is an area that I think people really underestimate. The number of times that we evaluate a software application or a firmware image or something like that from one version to the next and find more issues in the newer version is significant. And you might think to yourself, why would that be the case, Tom? Aren't they patching all these vulnerabilities? Put her on speakerphone, what you want. And so the big reason this happens is because you're adding typically new features and capabilities whenever you update that software. And when you do that, you're introducing new libraries, new dependencies, new open source components that maybe didn't go through a rigorous risk evaluation. So we've had multiple scenarios where you're really significantly increasing the risk of a particular thing by just upgrading something to the latest version, which I think is probably counterintuitive for a lot of folks. Proactive vulnerability identification. So when you think about how vulnerability scanners find vulnerabilities, they do this based on, number one, determining if something has a CPE, a common platform enumeration, which is basically like a make, model, version number in a string. So if it does not have a CPE, then there are no CVEs available, which means you will find no vulnerabilities for that thing. But that makes no sense, right? Because that's totally disregarding all of the libraries and dependencies and all the other things that make up whatever that thing is that you're scanning. So why this is called proactive vulnerability identification is you'll actually be finding vulnerabilities in software in your environment prior, not only to the big security vendors like the vulnerability scanners, but also prior to the people you're probably buying that software from, which I also think is counterintuitive to a lot of people. So you will know as an end user vulnerabilities and other issues that are in the code that you're procuring before the people who actually built it and sold it to you. That's probably fun for a little bit, but we'd like that to probably just not be the case eventually. Incident response and threat hunting, these are probably the most logical and practical use cases for folks. So I have some like scenarios up here. So a threat intelligence report indicates known backdoor in a widely used NPM package. Who here can tell me all the NPM packages that are in use by all the software in their environment? No one can do that. It's totally impossible, right? If you have SBOMs for all these things in your environment, you can answer this question instantly. Same thing, a new CVE is disclosed. You can alert security teams about that. A zero-day vulnerability in an open source library. This could be log4j, this could be xzutils, this could be a number of other celebrity vulnerabilities that were identified. But this allows you to react to these things on your own incredibly quickly where right now you have basically no recourse, and maybe you reach out to all your vendors and maybe they have an answer for you and maybe they don't. Compliance and regulatory alignment. So there's a ton of language in a bunch of these different regulations. You have IEC 62443, which is mainly for like industrial devices and things like that. NIST has language across many special publications. You have the Cyber Resiliency Act, as I mentioned. For all you financial services folks, in PCI DSS 4.0, which I think just went into effect, SBOMs are basically mandated for all of the infrastructure that is supporting PCI DSS. What you'll find sometimes in these regulations is they won't say an SBOM is required, but what they will say is a machine-readable artifact that contains all libraries, dependency, like they'll just describe exactly what an SBOM is, but they won't explicitly say it. And so in terms of some of the key takeaways here, number one is really about visibility. So getting visibility into your third-party software supply chain is possible without your vendor's help. SBOMs have utility across multiple security teams, right? It's not just for the security operations team or the vulnerability management team. It can start all the way with your third-party risk and procurement team and go all the way down into like a patch management team or a threat hunting and incident response team. So it's a great set of data that can operationalize a number of different things. And then number three, from an inventory, SBOMs are about building this inventory from the ground up. We've totally acknowledged that having an asset inventory within our environments is mandatory. We have to have that. So having a software inventory should also be mandatory for the same reasons. That's it. Any questions?
What do you see the future of SBOMs next couple of years? Then more people try to be compliant. What are the challenges? Obviously, no one wants to do all this stuff later.
Listen, if the DoD really puts this in place, here's the other great thing about the federal government taking charge here. The federal government doesn't buy software that's unique. They buy the exact same software that everybody else buys. Now, there's edge cases, of course, where they buy things that we're not allowed to buy. We can't go buy like a Humvee with a 50 cal machine gun on it or something, unfortunately. But if the DoD does that, they're just going to possess all that data already. And so what they decide to do with that data will effectively be taxpayer data. So will they make that data available publicly, potentially? It's hard to say. But I think that's probably the big thing that will start happening is the government's just taking a bigger role here, and that'll just create a market, which will be good. Sir?
So we actually use SBOMs at the company I work for, but the question I have for you is, like, when do you patch? Like you mentioned you patch, and sometimes that makes you less secure. So what do you recommend as far as that goes? Like, when's the right time to patch?
I think the thing that people need to do is create a risk management framework for how they evaluate whether or not they should patch things or not. So in some cases, we've seen appliances get updated and introduce like a brand new Apache Struts remote code execution vulnerability. In that case, I would say maybe don't patch, right? But in a lot of other cases, I would say you're probably better off patching in most cases still, but now you have data to support that decision one way or another. And you can work with your vendors and do whatever it is. But yeah, I'm not advocating that people should stop patching their software. That would be a crazy thing to say. But I am advocating for actually having good visibility into what you're doing in your environment, which we already do, right? Think about what we do from an EDR perspective. We track every single process that's running on every single Windows endpoint in our environment. And it's somehow this like big stretch to just say what software exists in my environment. Any other questions? I'm really happy to have just warmed up the stage for Rob Joyce because I know he gets nervous having done limited public speaking. All right, I'll be around, guys. Thanks a lot for the time. See ya.